My name is Ethan Harlow. I'm 31 years old, and in late September of last year, I took my refurbished RV to Mohican State Park in Ohio with 3 friends, Tom Bradley, Sarah Lynn, and Marco Reyes. At that time, I was working as an IT specialist in Columbus, leading a pretty straightforward life. I wanted a break from staring at screens all day and decided that a weekend getaway in nature would be the perfect way to recharge. I had no idea that the trip would shatter my understanding of what's real and plunge us into a nightmare. I still can't fully comprehend. I had known Tom since college. We roomed together in sophomore year and stayed friends despite our different personalities. Tom is a couple of months younger than I am. He was 30 at the time and works construction, which suits his no-nonsense, hands-on nature. He's never one to mince words, which can be equal parts refreshing and aggravating. Meanwhile, Sarah Lynn, 29 back then, is a nurse in an emergency department. She's calm, always the voice of reason, and rarely flustered. She dated Tom briefly in the past, which sometimes caused small ripples of tension in our group. The newest addition to our circle was Marco Reyes, 28, a freelance photographer and videographer. We'd met him at a local outdoors club a few months earlier, and he'd quickly become a friend. Though his ever-present camera could be intrusive, he lived for capturing the perfect shot and had a knack for turning the most mundane situations into captivating visual stories. I'd bought the RV secondhand and spent countless weekends refurbishing it. There was a certain pride in what I'd managed to accomplish, so I invited the others to test it out at Mohican State Park, a place I'd always heard was beautiful. The plan was simple: drive up on a Friday, find a scenic spot near one of the more remote campgrounds, and spend a few days hiking, filming, and maybe telling scary stories around the fire. Tom liked the idea because he craved time away from city noise. Sarah needed a break from the emotional toll of her job, and Marco thought the Mohican forests would give him footage that would dazzle his online following. We arrived on a Friday afternoon in early fall, just as the leaves were turning brilliant shades of red, gold, and orange. The drive itself took a couple of hours. We spent most of it talking about old times, joking around, and occasionally sparring with Tom's disbelief in anything paranormal. Sarah, on the other hand, was intrigued by local legends. She'd done some reading on a rumor that a Wendigo-like creature had been spotted in the region. Though Mohican territory wasn't traditionally known for Wendigo tales, there were always stories of a tall, gaunt figure lurking in the woods, a shapeshifter that thrived on human fear. Tom just rolled his eyes and said, "You all realize it's probably just a mangy deer or a starving coyote that everyone mistakes for a monster." Marco kept filming as we talked, more than happy to stir the pot by asking for more details about these legends. By the time we pulled into the park, the sun was dipping low, gilding the tree line with dusky orange light. A park ranger we encountered, a grizzled man in his 50s, warned us that a hiker had gone missing a couple of weeks back. He shrugged it off as an unfortunate accident, possibly a fall into the river or getting lost. The reminder that the forest could be dangerous gave me a slight chill. Still, we pressed on to our reserve spot, tucked away near a trailhead that led deeper into the woods than the more popular sections. I parked the RV, and as soon as I stepped out, I felt enveloped by the hush of towering trees all around. It was peaceful, yes, but there was also an unnerving stillness, like the forest was waiting for something. We set about unloading our gear. Sarah's job as a nurse had made her a stickler for preparedness. She had a full kit of medical supplies, just in case. Tom hoisted the firewood we'd brought, complaining that my old piece of junk RV was parked too far from level ground. Marco hopped around filming us, occasionally capturing the crimson sunset over the leafy canopy. I couldn't help but notice a series of deep scratches on a nearby tree, running in parallel lines almost too clean to be animal claw marks. I pointed them out to Tom, who dismissed them as wear from a falling branch. I let it go, but I couldn't shake the slight ripple of unease in my gut. Inside the RV, the small generator I'd painstakingly installed started acting up. The lights flickered, and the fridge refused to keep anything cold. Every time I tried to fix it, the generator would sputter back to life for a moment only to die again. "Guess your mechanical skills aren't as good as you bragged," Tom teased, but he also offered to help. That was the thing with Tom. He might be brutally honest, but he'd lend a hand without hesitation when it truly mattered. We ended up jury-rigging a temporary solution so the lights would at least stay on. Despite our best efforts, the fridge would only work intermittently, which was annoying, but not yet a major crisis. Marco joked that it was probably a ghost messing with us. Sarah just rolled her eyes. That first night, we settled around a campfire just outside the RV. The sky was clear, stars bright above the skeletal branches of the trees. The flames danced and crackled, throwing shifting shadows across our faces. Marco captured footage of the flickering firelight, occasionally panning his camera toward the forest. Sarah told us she'd read up on the Mohican area. Historically, the region had plenty of indigenous lore that might overlap with other Great Lakes legends. Tom insisted there was nothing supernatural going on, but even he had to admit the forest was eerily quiet. Around midnight, we all retreated to the RV. I was lying in my bunk, lulled by the occasional chirp of crickets, when I heard it. A low, mournful groan echoing through the woods. It wasn't a coyote yip, nor the hiss of wind. It sounded almost human, yet not quite. I sat up, straining to catch a second round of noise, but heard nothing further. I convinced myself it might be an owl and tried to sleep. Little did I know that Sarah was hearing something else entirely. Later, she told us she could have sworn someone was whispering her name near the window. The next morning, I rolled out of bed feeling the lingering weight of that odd noise. Tom was already outside, stoically poking at the cold embers of the fire. Sarah emerged shortly after, bleary-eyed, and told us she'd slept terribly. She seemed rattled. Marco was hunched over his camera. When we asked what he was looking at, he admitted he'd caught a strange shape in some of his night footage. It was quick, a darting silhouette between two trees taller than any of us, and it seemed to have either antlers or some protrusion atop its head, or maybe the film was just picking up distortion from branches overhead. Still, it made for an unsettling watch. Tom waved it off. "Look, it's got to be a trick of the light." But Sarah looked genuinely disturbed, and if I were honest, so was I. While discussing what to do with the day, Sarah suggested we hike one of the winding trails that followed the clear fork of the Mohican River. She wanted to see the water and get some exercise in daylight, as if sunlight could banish the memory of weird shadows from the night before. Tom agreed, partly because he needed to work off his restless energy. Marco was thrilled to get some scenic shots. I decided it was best to keep busy. We set off mid-morning, and the forest was breathtaking under the sun. Rays filtered through the canopy, illuminating pockets of golden leaves. Marco kept filming, capturing deer that scampered away at our approach. We were making good progress, but I noticed something off. The usual chirping and rustling you'd hear in a forest was sporadic, as if the wildlife were hiding or avoiding something. Occasionally, Tom muttered that he felt like we were being watched, though he tried to pass it off as a joke. The tension in the air was unmistakable, a tightness that none of us wanted to articulate. Eventually, we stumbled upon a small clearing where it looked like someone had camped once. But the site was in shambles. Torn fabric, possibly from a tent, lay in strips across the ground. A single boot was half buried in the leaf litter. Sarah crouched to pick up a dog-eared missing person flyer, so faded it was impossible to read all the details. Shreds of plastic, wrappers, and a battered flashlight were strewn about. The scene felt wrong, like we'd stepped into the aftermath of a struggle. There were claw marks on some of the nearby trees, similar to what I'd spotted the day before, but deeper. We all exchanged uneasy glances. Was this connected to the missing hiker the ranger had mentioned? On the way back, the mood was somber. No one spoke much except for the occasional "watch your step" as we navigated over some rocky terrain. When we reached the RV, it was late afternoon. A cold breeze had picked up, ruffling the branches overhead. Sarah immediately checked the fridge, which had once again shut itself off. Our drinks were lukewarm and the perishable food was starting to sweat. That was the final straw for Tom. He let out a string of curses about the useless generator. I tried to stay calm, fiddling with wires and connections again, but the generator only sputtered once and died. Marco helped by shining a flashlight, though he kept filming even then. I'd be lying if I said it didn't bother me, but at least he was offering light to see by. That evening, we decided to cook what we could over a campfire before it spoiled. Chicken, vegetables, a few pieces of fish we'd brought, all sizzling, over the open flames. The scent was hearty and comforting, but did nothing to shake the uneasy vibe. As darkness fell, a pall seemed to settle around the campsite. It was like the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting. Tom made a half-hearted joke. "Think your deer-headed ghost is hungry for real food?" But no one laughed. Just as we were finishing dinner, the wind carried a shrill cry across the trees. We all froze. It was not the typical yowl of a coyote or the distant bark of a fox. It sounded like a cross between a human scream and the cry of an injured animal. Sarah's eyes went wide, and even Tom looked rattled. Marco fumbled with his camera, trying to record the sound, but by the time he hit record, it was gone. Then we heard branches snapping, too close for comfort. We scurried to extinguish the fire, not wanting to draw attention from whatever was out there. We ended up inside the RV again, locking every door and window. The generator still refused to cooperate, so we relied on battery-powered lamps for light. The tension crackled like static. I tried to keep morale up, telling them it could just be a large predator. Sarah sat there, arms crossed, trying to steady her breathing. Tom paced the narrow aisle between the bunks. Marco rewound his camera footage, searching for any clue in the audio. Then came the sound of something brushing against the RV wall. It was a scratchy, deliberate rub, like long nails scraping metal. We all went silent, listening in dread. The first solid thump against the RV nearly made us jump out of our skins. A second later, we heard labored breathing from outside, a wet, rattling gasp. Tom, adrenaline surging, demanded to know what the plan was. We had two options: stay locked in until morning, or try to flee in the dark. But the roads near the campsite were unpaved and winding, and driving out at night might be more dangerous than waiting. Another heavy scrape slid along the RV wall. Marco hissed, I'm filming, as if capturing the sounds on camera would protect us. Sarah, the most level-headed of us, insisted we barricade ourselves for the night. We gathered everything we could: a hatchet, a hunting knife, and even a makeshift spear from a tent pole. Tom planted himself near the door, gripping the hatchet so hard his knuckles turned white. The scraping sounds continued for what felt like hours. Sometimes it circled around to the back, other times near the windows. Once the handle of the door rattled. I felt a wave of nausea at the thought of it actually getting inside. At some point, we heard a scraping sound on the roof, like claws, dragging over the metal. My heart hammered in my chest, and I could practically taste the metallic tang of fear in my mouth. Sarah whispered that we should remain absolutely silent, hoping that if we didn't move or speak, maybe it would lose interest. The primal, stifling dread of being trapped in that RV while something prowled just inches away from our heads was almost too much to bear. Finally, near dawn, the noises subsided. We waited another hour before daring to peek outside. When we did, the first rays of sunlight revealed massive footprints in the muddy ground around the RV. They looked human at first glance, but elongated, as if whoever left them stood 8 feet tall. We decided in broad daylight that we had to get away from that specific site. However, the generator issue meant we'd have a difficult time traveling if it worsened. Sarah and Tom argued he wanted to drive out immediately, generator be damned, while Sarah insisted it was safer to wait and figure out a plan. Maybe talk to the ranger again. Marco was caught in the middle, anxious to leave but also enthralled by the possibility of capturing something truly extraordinary on film. I, for one, needed to see if we could fix the generator so we wouldn't end up stranded in the middle of nowhere if the engine gave out. Tensions bubbled over. Tom shouted at Marco to put the damn camera away. Sarah snapped at Tom, reminding him that we needed to stay level-headed and not tear each other apart. I tried to mediate, but my calm facade was cracking under the weight of the surreal events. We eventually agreed to at least attempt one more salvage job on the generator. Tom and I worked on it while Sarah kept watch, and Marco scoured the perimeter for more tracks or signs of what had visited us. Mid-repair, Tom and I heard Marco shout from somewhere along the tree line. We raced over, tools in hand, to find him, standing by another campsite, an older one evidently abandoned. A battered tent lay shredded, bleached by sun and rain. The ground was littered with empty cans, a broken lantern, and something that made my stomach lurch. A torn sleeping bag smeared with dried blood. Sarah arrived just after us, going pale at the sight. Tom scowled, fear flickering across his face, as he realized this wasn't just some harmless wildlife problem. We scoured the area quickly, finding partial footprints, much like the ones near our RV, and a rancid smell that hung in the air. Flies buzzed around the remains of what looked like small animal bones. "I don't think this is a typical predator," I said, my voice shaking. Nobody disagreed. It was too strange, too deliberate. We rushed back to the RV, convinced that we were dealing with something inhuman. Despite the dread swirling around us, we managed to partially fix the generator so it ran in fits and starts. At least we had some hope of making a drive out of the park if it held together. We planned to leave first thing the next morning, when the roads would be clear and well lit. Meanwhile, Tom insisted we arm ourselves. He had a hunting rifle stashed away, but the plan had been to use it only for protection against wild animals if necessary. Now it felt like we were preparing for war. That night we decided to turn in early, to wake at dawn. But as darkness fell, an oppressive weight settled over the area. Clouds obscured the moon and stars, turning the forest into an endless sea of black. We took shifts staying awake. I volunteered for the first watch with Tom, while Sarah and Marco tried to get some rest. We kept the RV lights low, not wanting to attract attention. A couple of hours into our shift, I thought I saw something large move between the trees. Tom tensed up beside me, rifle at the ready. A moment later, a horrifying howl echoed so close it seemed to reverberate inside my skull. Then came a sickening thud as something collided with the RV. Tom swore and threw the door open, aiming the rifle into the darkness. I grabbed a flashlight and illuminated a slice of forest. That's when I caught a glimpse of it. A tall, impossibly thin form hunched near the edge of the woods. Its limbs were too long, its eyes reflecting an otherworldly gleam. It let out a guttural snarl that sounded like a furious mix of man and beast. Tom fired a shot. The echo boomed, and the creature darted behind a large oak faster than any human could move. Sarah and Marco, awakened by the commotion, stumbled forward. We slammed the door shut. A rapid series of bangs pounded on the RV walls, and we huddled, in terror, unsure if the bullets had any effect. Then the pounding stopped. In that excruciating silence, we heard a faint, rasping whisper through one of the windows. I couldn't make out the words, if there were words at all, but it felt like it was mocking us. Our panic rocketed. At some point, Tom decided he'd had enough. He declared we'd make a run for the ranger station, on foot if necessary, before the thing ripped the RV apart. Sarah argued it was safer to use the RV as shelter until dawn. They nearly came to blows, each too terrified to think rationally. Marco, camera forgotten for once, kept glancing at the windows as if expecting the creature to come bursting in. Ultimately, we chose a desperate middle ground. Wait until the first hint of light, then drive out together. None of us got any rest. The creature's presence lingered, scraping occasionally at the walls, letting out those awful moans that made my teeth chatter. Finally, a dull gray brightness bled into the sky. We took our chance. I cranked the RV's engine. It coughed to life, and we rattled along the rough campsite road, branches scraping the sides, each jostle sending our nerves into overdrive. We hadn't gotten very far when we saw it again, pacing us on a parallel track through the woods. Through the passenger window, I caught glimpses of its elongated form weaving between trunks, sometimes on two legs, sometimes on all fours. Tom raised his rifle to the window, but it was pointless to shoot while bumping over dirt roads at 15 miles per hour. Sarah kept urging me to go faster, but I was scared the engine would stall on a pothole or the generator would give out. The RV bucked and wheezed, but it kept going. We emerged onto a slightly better maintained road that cut through the park. My relief was short-lived. Without warning, the creature sprang onto the road behind us, lit by the weak dawn light. Marco, who had resumed filming, let out a cry. In the camera's display, I saw the creature's eyes shine, its mouth parted in a ragged snarl that looked almost human but was far too wide. Tom fired another shot from the side window. I couldn't tell if he hit it, but the thing reeled back, then vanished into the brush. We sped onward, hearts pounding, until we reached the ranger station. Slamming the RV's brakes, I nearly lurched out of my seat. We stumbled out, yelling for help. A young ranger with bleary eyes opened the door. Our story sounded insane, but the terror in our voices was real. He hurried inside to radio for backup, possibly other rangers or local law enforcement. When they arrived, we blurted out every detail: missing hikers, the old campsite, the footprints, the horrifying shape in the woods. They listened politely, but I could see skepticism behind their concerned expressions. Tom insisted on showing them the damage to the RV, the scratches and dents. That seemed to convince them something had attacked us, but they attributed it to maybe a bear with mange or a cougar. I felt an urge to laugh at the inadequacy of that explanation, but there was no humor left in me. Marco reviewed his footage in front of them. The shape was there, though the frames were shaky. It was enough to send one of the rangers outside, to talk to his superior in hushed tones, but not enough for them to officially declare a monster roamed the park. They suggested we get medical checkups and fill out a thorough incident report. Sarah was shaking her head, as if she couldn't believe we were basically being dismissed. Tom's anger flared, but I put a hand on his shoulder. We had to be grateful we were alive at all. We left Mohican State Park soon after. As we drove out on the main highway, the morning sun seemed to wash away some of the terror, like we were stepping back into a realm where logic and reason held sway. But the raw fear inside me refused to settle. Tom was silent for most of the ride. Occasionally, he'd let out a derisive scoff at the ranger station's casual brush-off. Sarah stared out the window, her eyes hollow. Marco sat with the camera in his lap, reviewing the footage over and over. Each time he paused on the creature's silhouette, his face paled anew. I was too rattled to protest. I almost wanted him to keep that visual proof for my own sanity, to confirm that we hadn't collectively dreamed it. We arrived back in Columbus by late afternoon. We parked at my place, each of us too exhausted to say much. Tom and Sarah got in Tom's truck, heading back to their respective apartments. Marco lingered a moment, promising he'd send me copies of the footage. I just nodded, not sure I wanted to see it again. In the days that followed, we kept in touch, mostly to check on each other's mental state. Sarah confided that she couldn't sleep without hearing that raspy whisper calling her name. Tom refused to talk about it, burying himself in work. Marco uploaded a heavily edited version of his video to a private folder online. He didn't go public with it. After reviewing the comments from people he trusted, he realized no one would believe it was real. As for me, I found myself lying. Awake at night, every little noise outside my apartment stirring a stab of panic in my chest. I kept recalling that feeling of being watched in the forest and the horrifying outline of that gaunt shape. Sometimes I wondered if it had followed us. After all, who's to say it was confined to those woods? I tried to return to my normal routine, but every mention of Mohican State Park on the news sent a jolt through me. A few weeks later, I caught a brief segment about another missing hiker. The official explanation was an unfortunate accident. I closed my eyes and thought about the battered campsite we'd found, the torn sleeping bag, the thick, metallic smell of dried blood. I thought about the parallel set of footprints around our RV. If that monstrous being still lurked there, and I had every reason to believe it did, it was only a matter of time before the next campers became its prey. Sometimes, late at night, I replay in my mind the final glimpse I caught of it in Marco's camera lens. The elongated limbs, the reflection of eyes that seemed almost intelligent, the chilling impression that it was something ancient and beyond any rational explanation. I remember how its mouth twisted into a grin, or a snarl. It was too dark, and I was too panicked to decipher the difference. Either way, it exuded a sense of malevolence I will never forget. I still have nightmares where I'm back in the RV at night, pinned in place while the walls shudder under the force of that creature's claws. I hear my own ragged breath, The screams of my friends, the scrape of talons across the metal roof. Sometimes in these nightmares I never escape. Other times I watch as my friends are dragged into the forest, leaving me alone and helpless. I wake up drenched in sweat, trying to reassure myself that I'm in my bedroom, miles from that haunted stretch of Ohio woods, but the horror of that weekend won't fully release me. Everything about Mohican State Park, the swirling autumn leaves, the lonesome trails, the deep hush of the trees, has been tainted by the memory of what stalked us. I tell myself we were lucky. We survived with only scrapes and psychological scars. Yet part of me wonders if we merely postponed the inevitable. That one day someone will go to those same remote trails and not come back, and the cycle will continue with no end in sight. I sometimes consider returning, not because I'm reckless enough to want a second encounter, but because a piece of me needs answers. Needs to prove that the fear was justified, that this thing, this Wendigo-like monstrosity, truly roams the forest. Another part of me, wiser perhaps, insists that going back would be the worst mistake of my life. And so I remain caught in this uneasy limbo, haunted by the knowledge that reality can shatter so swiftly, and that there are entities out there which defy explanation. As I write this, I can still see the final footprints that surrounded our RV the morning we left. Massive impressions in the mud, elongated to inhuman proportions, forming a perfect circle as though it had paced around us for hours. No matter how many times I remind myself that we escaped, I still feel trapped by that memory, trapped by the knowledge that some horrors don't disappear just because daylight comes. They merely retreat into the shadows, waiting for the next unwary traveler to wander in, armed with little more than disbelief and frail human courage. And that is the story of what happened to me, Ethan Harlow, age 31, during a single harrowing weekend in the deep, silent stretches of Mohican State Park. I went there for a carefree adventure with friends, but came away with a realization that changed me forever. Some legends aren't mere myths, and nature can hold secrets more terrifying than any ghost story around a campfire. If you ever find yourself in those woods, listen carefully to the hush between the trees. If it grows too quiet, if the animals vanish and even the wind stops singing, run, because something might be watching you, something that doesn't belong in our world, but very much exists in that place between reason and nightmare. And if it's anything like the creature we encountered, it won't let you go so easily. My name is Madison Clark. I'm 28 years old, and the events I'm about to describe took place last October in Zaleski State Forest, located in southeastern Ohio. I'd driven there alone in my old RV, determined to spend a week off the grid to clear my head. I had just come out of a messy breakup, and before that I'd had a huge fight with my sister that still made my chest ache whenever I thought about it. I wanted some time in nature, true solitude, to remind myself I could handle life on my own terms. The forest, so I believed, would be a peaceful refuge where I could finally finish my travel blog posts and piece my thoughts back together. When I pulled into the Zaleski campsite, dusk was settling in, painting the horizon in lavender and deep orange. The place was mostly empty, just a couple of RVs clustered near the main road, whereas I chose a spot farther down, closer to a winding trail that led into the densest part of the woods. I was used to campgrounds that filled up quickly, but not here. The hush felt both comforting and unsettling, like something waiting to be discovered. When I stepped out of the driver's seat, the evening air was cool and lightly perfumed by pine and damp leaves. There was a fire ring and a picnic table, and a sign marking the trailhead a short walk away. I remember the sense of anticipation that trickled down my spine, equal parts excitement and unease. As I was unhooking cables and getting my RV leveled, a ranger approached, tall, lean, wearing a neutral expression that betrayed neither warmth nor suspicion. He introduced himself as Ranger Beckett. He asked about my plans, took note of my out-of-county plates, and gave me the usual safety reminders. Watch out for uneven trails, keep food locked away to avoid attracting animals, and be mindful of the occasional black bear. When he noticed I was traveling alone, his eyebrows lifted slightly, but he said nothing discouraging. Then in an offhand tone, he mentioned that folks around here sometimes talked about strange nighttime lights in the forest. Usually it's hikers seeing fireflies or reflections, he said. But if you do spot anything weird, best to stick to the marked trails. I nodded, not thinking much of it. Mysterious lights, sure. I imagined distant bonfires or maybe college kids goofing around with flashlights. I spent the next hour setting up inside the RV, testing the little generator I'd installed a few months earlier. The overhead lights flickered once or twice, but I blamed that on a loose connection. Outside, the wind picked up, sending dry leaves skittering across the picnic table. I made myself a quick dinner, canned soup heated on my tiny stove, then sat out under the canopy of stars. No one else was nearby, so the only sounds came from wind-rustled branches and the occasional hoot of an owl. I felt a sense of calm settle around me. Even though I was alone, I expected this quiet to nourish me, help me figure out the swirl of emotions I carried. That first night, I found it hard to sleep. The darkness was absolute once I turned off the RV's interior lights. Every little noise outside became a point of focus. Scratches that might be branches, rustling that might be a raccoon, faint taps that could be acorns dropping from overhead. I lay in my bunk listening intently. At one point, I could have sworn I heard a distant sob. I switched on the small reading lamp and sat up, heart pounding. Outside, everything was still. I told myself it was the wind again, or maybe just my mind playing tricks. Eventually, I dozed off. In the morning, I woke early, made some instant coffee on the stove, and decided to stretch my legs by exploring one of the short trails that branched off near my site. A crisp light filtered through the canopy, giving everything a golden hue. The forest felt fresh, alive with bird calls I couldn't identify. My plan was to log the experience for my blog, take a few pictures, and maybe find a good spot to write. About half a mile in, I noticed what looked like an older campsite to the side of the trail, completely abandoned. The fire ring was half collapsed, the ashes gray and soggy, scattered with leaves. There was a battered folding chair leaning at an awkward angle, and near it, poking from a pile of decaying foliage, was a small child's shoe. The shoe grabbed my attention immediately. It couldn't have belonged to an adult hiker. I stepped over to see if it was part of someone's forgotten gear. It was a tiny sneaker, scuffed, laces missing, with the color so faded that I couldn't tell if it was once red or pink. A chill crawled along my arms. It didn't feel like the usual detritus you find when a family leaves behind a bit of trash or a lost item. Something about it made me picture a lonely child standing in that very spot. I looked around, half expecting to find more abandoned belongings, but saw nothing except damp leaves and some empty plastic water bottles. I snapped a few photos, intending to ask a ranger about it later. Feeling uneasy, I returned to my RV. The door was unlocked, which I shrugged off at first, assuming I'd simply forgotten to secure it. Inside, nothing seemed missing, but an odd detail nagged at me. The new notepad I'd left on the table was gone from where I'd placed it. I eventually found it lying on my bunk, as if I'd set it there absent-mindedly. I tried to recall if I'd done that before heading out, but I couldn't. A faint tension gnawed at me. I told myself I was just spooking myself unnecessarily. After breakfast, I decided to drive a short distance to see if I could talk to someone about local folklore. I'd heard rumors about Zaleski having odd ghost stories, something about orbs and flickering lights, but I was curious to learn more. Ranger Beckett was at the station, where I mentioned finding an abandoned campsite. He nodded, stating that occasionally campers left old junk behind, but he scribbled down the location. He asked if I'd seen any tracks or signs of recent animals, or if I saw the shoe size. I estimated it belonged to a child around 8 or 10 years old. He didn't seem alarmed, merely said, "These woods have a lot of secrets. Folks come and go, sometimes leaving behind more than they intended." I pressed him about the rumored lights. He laughed politely, glancing at the clock. Most people who claim to see weird lights are seeing swamp gas or reflection off the wet foliage. Maybe the occasional kids messing around with lanterns. But I wouldn't wander out at night, especially off the marked trails. Zaleski can get confusing in the dark. I was mildly disappointed. I'd hoped for a more intriguing story, but decided to let it go. On my way back to the RV, I stopped at a tiny local store for some extra supplies. That was where I ran into Linda Hawthorne. She was an older woman, maybe late 60s, with a gentle face and long silver hair woven into a braid. She greeted me in the aisle, noting I wasn't from around there. I told her I was camping in Zaleski, and her eyes lit. With something I couldn't quite identify, she asked if I liked ghost stories, and I admitted that while I was curious, I'd never really experienced anything definitive. Linda smiled thinly and said, "Then maybe you'll be the one to help them." I asked what she meant. She spoke softly of lantern children, ghostly figures rumored to appear at night, carrying small lights or lanterns, wandering the forest as if lost. She had no proof, just local tales passed down. When I asked if that included an actual lost child, her expression closed a bit. "Long time ago, a few kids vanished. Some say they never left these woods." Then she told me to be careful, especially after dark. I felt an odd flutter in my stomach at her words. Something about the gravity in her gaze hinted there was more truth to these stories than I wanted to believe. I left the store unsettled, my arms prickling with goosebumps. The ominous feeling only grew when I returned to the RV that afternoon. The lights flickered again, more persistently this time, even though the generator seemed fine. A battery icon on my phone jumped from 80% to 20% in minutes. Outside, the sky had grown overcast, a drizzle threatening to become heavier rain. I busied myself reorganizing the RV, trying to chase away the chill of Linda's words. "Lantern children," I whispered to myself. It sounded like a local legend meant to keep kids from wandering off at night. That evening, the rain settled into a steady patter. I found it oddly soothing at first, the droplets drumming on the RV's roof. I wrote in my journal, capturing the day's events, feeling them turn in my stomach like heavy stones. Around 9, the rain eased. I slipped on a jacket and stepped outside with a flashlight, compelled to get some fresh air. The forest was dark but not silent. Water dripped from leaves and the wind rustled gently. Then, perhaps 15 yards away, behind the nearest row of trees, a faint glow caught my eye. My heart jolted. A single point of light bobbed at a height that might align with a small person carrying a candle or lantern. I switched off my flashlight, not wanting to blind myself, and tried to see if there was any shape attached to it. I couldn't. The glow was too dim, swaying side to side, and then it drifted deeper into the woods. I stood there, torn between caution and curiosity. Should I follow? Was it just another camper with a strange old-fashioned lamp? Or was I witnessing the very phenomenon Linda had hinted at? My pulse pounded in my ears. Ultimately, a reckless curiosity pushed me forward. I needed to see it up, close, to confirm it was just some normal explanation. I walked slowly, the ground soft beneath my boots, the smell of wet earth around me. But the farther I went, the deeper the darkness seemed to grow, as if the canopy above swallowed the moonlight. The small glow bobbed ahead, always seeming just out of reach. Then it vanished. The forest dimmed entirely, and I realized I had walked a good distance off the marked path. My flashlight flickered weakly when I switched it back on. Panic spiked in my chest. I turned around, trying to retrace my steps, but every angle looked the same. Tall trunks, thick undergrowth, glistening leaves. Suddenly, a muffled giggle drifted from behind me. I spun, flashlight beam trembling over the wet bark. Nothing. My skin crawled and I found myself whispering, "Hello? Is someone there?" Another faint giggle, closer this time. A childlike sound. If it was a child, they were in big trouble being out here in the dark alone. But something told me it wasn't just a lost kid. My hair stood on end. I forced myself to move, forging a path back the way I thought I'd come. I wandered for what felt like an hour, though it was probably less. Relief washed over me when I finally caught sight of my RV's silhouette against the faint glow of the porch lamp I'd left on. Once inside, I locked the door and sank onto the driver's seat, heart hammering. My phone's battery was at 5% now. Fear and wonder tangled in my mind. That light had seemed so real, but it appeared and disappeared too conveniently. And the giggle, it still rang in my ears, half playful, half sorrowful. I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel, trying to steady my breathing. The next morning, I woke stiff and tired. I could barely recall drifting off. My phone was dead, so I plugged it in. The generator's power was waning. I heard it sputter in protest. After a simple breakfast, I decided to drive to the forest boundary and maybe find Linda Hawthorne's place. It took some asking among a few locals, but they pointed me to a small, weathered house near a gravel road. Linda answered, wearing the same braid and a calm expression. I told her about the light and how I'd nearly gotten lost. She nodded gravely. Some say the spirit appears to those who carry guilt in their hearts, she said softly. Others claim it's simply a lost child's ghost. Either way, it beckons you deeper. If you follow, you might not come back. Her words sent a chill across my shoulders. I hadn't confessed anything about my personal life, yet she seemed to sense my inner turmoil. She brewed tea and told me a story. Decades ago, a local boy named Robbie disappeared in those woods. Search parties found no trace except for a single shoe. Some believed he drowned in a ravine. Others said he was taken by a drifter. Over the years, people have reported a small figure carrying a lantern or orb, vanishing between the trees, whispering in the night. Linda claimed the sightings continued to the present day, always near the same general area. I told her about the child's shoe at the old campsite, and she shook her head sadly. Those who see the lantern child can't shake it off easily, she warned. Something in its presence compels them to keep searching. I left Linda's place brimming with more questions than answers. As the sun climbed higher, I felt torn. Part of me wanted to pack up and leave Zaleski immediately, yet another part felt anchored here, irresistibly drawn to the idea that this child, this spirit, was reaching out for something. Or maybe I was just enthralled by the mystery, a distraction from my own heartbreak. When I returned to my site, I found the rangers, truck pulling away. He'd left a note warning about an incoming storm that evening. The note also said the trails could become hazardous. I took it to heart but knew it wouldn't be enough to keep me locked indoors if the lights appeared again. That evening, I tried to distract myself by writing in my journal. Rain clouds rolled in, dulling the sky to a slate gray. I set a small lantern outside my RV's door, ironically thinking that perhaps a little brightness would ward off whatever lurked in the forest. A few hours later, the rain started, just a steady drizzle at first, then picking up into a downpour. Inside, the generator's lights flickered again, and I cursed my luck. I was tired of these malfunctions, tired of feeling unmoored. The nights alone had begun to weigh on me more than I expected. Just after midnight, the downpour weakened. My ears pricked at a soft sound, a tapping at the far side of the RV, like small fingertips on metal. My stomach clenched. I slid to the window, peering out. The darkness was heavy, shapes of wet trees barely visible. Then from the corner of my eye, I spotted it again, that tiny glow, bobbing in the forest. My pulse jumped. This time it was much closer, maybe only 10 yards from my campsite. My breath caught in my throat as I saw a faint silhouette. Short, childlike, with something round near its face. Could it be a lantern? My heart hammered, so loudly I could feel it in my throat. Every rational thought screamed at me to stay put, to lock the door, but a strange mix of compassion and fear propelled me to step outside. I needed to see it clearly, to be sure. The moment my feet touched the muddy ground, the figure darted deeper into the trees. Holding my flashlight high, I followed. My steps squelched against the soil, water dripping from leaves overhead. I whispered, "Hello?" The childlike shape flickered behind a trunk. I caught a glimpse of a pale face, eyes round and scared. Or was it curious? There was no real color to see in the dim glow, just a ghostly outline. It let out a soft sob, heartbreakingly real. My chest tightened. If it truly was some lost child's spirit, was it trying to show me where it was last alive? I followed deeper, using the faint glow as my guide whenever my flashlight beam failed me. The storm's remnants made the forest floor slippery. My boots sliding over mossy roots. At times I'd catch a glimpse of that pale face or the shimmering orb, and then lose sight of both. Rain dripped down my neck, but I barely noticed. The tension was almost unbearable. I started seeing shapes in every bush, hearing a child's voice echo my name, a whispered Maddie, as if carried by the wind. And then I stumbled upon an old foundation, half buried in earth, stones slick with moss and time. It looked like what might have been a small cabin once, collapsed and devoured by decades of undergrowth. In the center of this clearing, the child's figure stood. The glow surrounded it like a halo, flickering erratically, as though fighting to stay lit. My heart pounded so fiercely that my vision blurred. "Who are you?" I managed to whisper. The child raised its head, revealing hollow cheeks, eyes that shone oddly in the half-light. For a moment I sensed deep sorrow radiating from it, as if all the loneliness in the world had settled in that small body. My flashlight flickered again, threatening to die. I dared a step forward, driven by empathy and trembling fear. Lightning flashed overhead, illuminating the clearing in stark white. In that instant, the child's features sharpened. Ragged clothing, hair plastered to its forehead, a face that looked both real and not. Its mouth opened, but the thunder drowned out whatever sound emerged. My flashlight completely died. Darkness fell again, broken only by the ephemeral glow around that child. When thunder subsided, I heard a soft voice. "Help." The word was faint, more of a breath than speech. Tears blurred my eyes. I reached out, uncertain what I was even trying to do. Touch a ghost? Then the orb flickered wildly, as if the child were losing strength. Another bolt of lightning revealed the entire clearing for a heartbeat. The child turned away from me as though beckoning me to follow deeper into the ruins. But something in my gut told me not to go any farther, like crossing that threshold would mean I'd never come back. It was a primal, gripping fear. I hesitated, and the child's form faltered, flickering as if cursing my indecision. Then it vanished, leaving me in oppressive darkness, the storm growing louder. I stumbled back the way I came, blindly clawing at branches for support, my eyes adjusting to the faint starlight that seeped through clouds. I half expected the child to reappear or some monstrous shape to grab me. My breath tore in ragged gasps, heart drumming an unsteady rhythm. Somehow, by sheer frantic luck, I found the trail that led toward my campsite. Relief washed over me when I spotted the faint glow of my RV porch lamp. It felt like returning from another world. I collapsed inside, mud caked to my clothes, water dripping off my hair. I locked the door, though I doubted any lock would stop a genuine spirit. My hands shook as I wiped the rain off my face. I spent the rest of the night curled in my bunk, lights on, listening to every patter and creak. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw the child's face etched in the darkness of my mind. By dawn, the rain had receded, replaced by a heavy mist that shrouded the forest. Exhausted, I decided I'd had enough. I packed up as best I could, intending to drive out, but the generator, of course, decided to fight me, sputtering and dying. The battery in the RV was nearly drained too. I managed to get the engine started, though it coughed ominously. With no phone signal and the road slick, I aimed to get to the ranger station. I drove slowly over narrow gravel roads that glistened with puddles. The entire time I expected a small figure to run out in front of me. My imagination kept conjuring phantom shapes beyond the tree line. When I arrived, Ranger Beckett came out to greet me, eyebrows pinched at the sight of my disheveled, muddy condition. I could barely articulate what had happened, stammering about lights and an apparition. He sighed, telling me about people who sometimes think they see ghosts after hearing local tales. I insisted that I'd seen something real. He didn't exactly dismiss me, but I could tell he believed I was overly stressed or spooked. Another ranger suggested maybe it was a misidentified wild animal. Raccoons can have eerie eyeshine after all. As I was about to leave, Linda Hawthorne arrived in her old pickup. She looked at me with that same knowing expression. Quietly, she asked if I'd found the child. I couldn't speak. She then told me, just loud enough for me to hear, that the child often appears to those in need of letting go. Sometimes, the spirit is seeking companionship, sometimes deliverance from an endless wandering. It was up to us to give it rest. Though the rangers heard her, they only shook their heads, clearly unconvinced. Linda patted my arm gently. "Be safe," she whispered. I drove away from the station, heart thrumming with a tumult of emotion, fear, sorrow, and some strange sense of awe. The roads out of Zaleski were still damp, morning fog drifting across them like ribbons. At some point I glanced in my rearview mirror, and there, in the distance between the trees, I saw a brief flicker of light. It could have been a reflection or something else. My breath caught. The flicker remained for a split second, then vanished into the mist. I was torn. A part of me wanted to turn back, to try to help that child's spirit find peace. Another part screamed that I had already risked too much, that I was nearly lost in the process. After all, I had my own regrets, my own sadness. Could I truly free a lost spirit when I was so bound by guilt about my sister, about the resentment and harsh words we'd exchanged? I'd gone to the forest to get away from people, but maybe I found a reflection of my own isolation in that wandering ghost. In the end, I kept driving, the weight of the experience pressing on my chest. Even as I write this, weeks later, I still see that pale face in my dreams, hear the soft cry for help in every midnight hush. Sometimes I wonder if I should go back, lay flowers near those ruins, or pray for the child's soul. Other times, I convince myself it was some elaborate trick of the mind, but deep down I know that forest breathed with an otherworldly presence that chose to reveal itself to me. Now, whenever the sky darkens and I catch sight of flickering lights, be it a porch lamp in the distance or a passing car's reflection on a wet street, I think of Zaleski. I think of the lantern child drifting through that timeless woodland, waiting for someone to offer a hand or at least witness its existence. I suspect it continues to wander, leading the curious astray, or perhaps guiding them toward revelations they didn't realize they needed. I've tried to make amends with my sister since then, to bridge the gap between us. Maybe the fear of leaving things unresolved came from seeing how tragedy can trap a soul in limbo. I tell myself that by reconciling with her, I'm honoring that lost child, making sure no more threads remain frayed in my life. If the child's spirit ever crosses my path again, maybe we'll both be one step closer to peace. Still, the memory haunts me, an echo that resonates late at night. I picture that small figure in the clearing, drenched by rain, luminous with a sorrow older than any fairy tale. I remember how close I came to following, how the single word, help, drew me onward. The question that remains is whether I did any good by bearing witness. Perhaps the child is still out there, nights drifting into centuries, lost and alone, calling for someone who will see beyond the veil of reason and fear. All I know is that Zaleski State Forest carries secrets that lurk beyond the boundaries of marked trails and daylight illusions. If you ever find yourself there, keep your eyes open at dusk. If you glimpse a faint glow bobbing between the trees, if you hear a quiet giggle or a plaintive cry in the darkness, remember, not every lost soul can be found. Some remain, tethered by tragedy or heartbreak, waiting for a kindness or an understanding that might set them free. Whether you follow that light or flee from it is a choice only you can make. But be warned, it may change you in ways you never expected. And so ends my tale of the lantern child in Zaleski Forest. My name is Madison Clark, and I was 28 years old when I discovered that some stories refuse to remain mere folklore. Even now, months later, I can't rid myself of the notion that I brushed against something truly supernatural. Maybe, one day I'll return, better prepared to face that small, flickering spirit. For now, though, I carry this memory like a faintly glowing lantern within me, a reminder of how thin the line can be between the living and the lost.